Hey, what is up everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
There is a name that echoes through the dark corridors of imperial history, a name spoken only in whispers by those who know enough to fear what it represents. It is not the name of a conqueror who marched openly at the head of great armies. It is not the name of a champion who stood tall on the killing fields of 100 burning worlds. No. This is a name that belongs to the shadows, a name that was never supposed to be known at all, and yet 10,000 years after the galaxy was torn apart by civil war, after empires burned and gods were born from the screams of the dying, this name continues to haunt the Imperium of man like a ghost that refuses to be laid to rest. That name is Omegon. If you were to ask the scribes of terror, the archivists who spend their lifetimes cataloguing the deeds of the Emperor's sons, they would tell you there were 20 Primarchs. They would tell you about Horus the War Master, golden and terrible. About Reboot Guilliman, the Lord of Ultramar, who even now walks again among mortal men. About Sanguinius the Angel, whose death at the hands of his corrupted brother remains one of the most tragic moments in all of human history. They would tell you about each of these demigods, one by one, reciting their names and their deeds from memory. But when they reached the 20th entry in their records, when they came to the Primarch designated as the last to be found, their voices would grow quieter, their words would become less certain, because what they know about the 20th Primarch could fill a single page, and most of what is written on that page might very well be a lie. The Imperial records acknowledge a Primarch named Alfarius. The last discovered, or so the story goes, found by Horus himself during the final years of the Great Crusade. He commanded the 20th Space Marine Legion, known as the Alpha Legion, and he led them to war with methods that made his brothers uncomfortable. Where other Primarchs valued honor and open confrontation, Alfarius preferred deception, espionage, infiltration, and misdirection. He was the spy master of the Emperor's sons, the Primarch who believed that the greatest victories were the ones your enemy never saw coming. But here is where the story fractures. Here is where the cracks in the official record begin to show, and through those cracks, something altogether stranger seeps in. Because Alfarius was not one Primarch, he was two. Hidden within the ranks of the Alpha Legion, unknown to the other legions, unknown perhaps even to the Emperor himself, there existed a secret so profound that it threatened to undermine everything the Imperium believed about its own creation. Alfarius had an identical twin, a brother who shared his face, his genetic code, his very soul. A Primarch who operated in total secrecy, moving through the galaxy like a phantom, commanding entire wings of the Alpha Legion without anyone outside the 20th ever knowing he existed. This hidden twin, this second head of the Hydra, was called Omegon. And of all the 20 Primarchs, of all the demigod sons of the Emperor of mankind, Omegon is without question the most enigmatic, the most unknowable, and the most mysterious figure to have ever shaped the destiny of the human race. Tonight, we are going to talk about him. But we are going to pull back the layers of deception and misdirection that the Alpha Legion has woven around the story of their hidden Primarch. We are going to trace his path from the moment of his creation in the Emperor's gene laboratory beneath the Himalayan mountains, through his solitary upbringing on a nameless and forgotten world, through his reunion with his twin brother in the hellish war zone of the Rangdan Xenocides, and into the darkness of the Horus Heresy, as where the choices he made would echo across 10 millennia of human history. We will talk about the Cabal, the ancient alien organization that showed the twin Primarchs visions of the future, and ask them to make the most terrible choice imaginable. We will talk about the growing fracture between Alfarius and Omegon, two brothers who shared a soul but could not agree on how to save it. We will talk about the Battle of Pluto, where one twin fell and the other was left alone for the first time in his existence. And we will explore the deepest mystery of all, the question that the lore itself refuses to answer with any certainty. Is Omegon still alive? So settle in, let the sounds of the void wash over you, and let us begin the story of the Primarch who was never supposed to exist. Before we go further, Yet it is important to understand something about the nature of the Alpha Legion and why the story of Omegon is so uniquely difficult to tell. When you research any other Primarch, when you dig into the histories of Reboot Guilliman or Leman Russ or Perturabo, you are working with a foundation of established facts. The details might be embellished, the perspectives might be biased, but the broad strokes are agreed upon. Guilliman was raised on Macragge, Russ was raised on Fenris, Perturabo was raised on Olympia. These are not disputed. With the Alpha Legion, there is no such foundation. Every source is suspect. Every account might be a fabrication. The very historians who recorded the Alpha Legion's deeds may have been Alpha Legion agents themselves, embedding misinformation into the official record as a matter of routine. Inquisitor Craven of the Ordo Malleus, who provided much of the Imperial data concerning the 20th Primarch, or was later believed to have been compromised by the Alpha Legion. His whereabouts are unknown. His testimony, once considered authoritative, is now treated as potentially tainted evidence. This means that everything we are about to discuss comes with an inherent caveat. We are telling the story as best we can reconstruct it from available sources, but we must always keep in mind that the Alpha Legion's greatest weapon has always been information control. They do not simply lie. First, they construct elaborate alternative narratives, seed them with enough truth to be convincing, and then allow their enemies to draw conclusions that serve the Alpha Legion's purposes. With that understanding firmly in place, let us begin at the very beginning. To understand Omegon, we must first understand how he came to be. And to understand that, we need to go back to the very beginning, to a time before the Imperium of Man existed, before the Great Crusade had been conceived, and before the Primarchs had names or faces or destinies laid out before them. In the dying years of the Age of Strife, as Old Night gripped the galaxy and humanity teetered on the edge of extinction, a being of incomprehensible power walked the surface of Terra. He had many names across the millennia: Warlord, Savior, Tyrant. But to those who served him in those early days, before the lies and the propaganda and the golden armor, he was simply known as the Emperor, and he had a plan. Beneath the towering peaks of the Himalayan mountains, in gene laboratories so vast and so deeply buried that they existed in perpetual darkness, the Emperor embarked upon the most ambitious act of biological engineering the galaxy had ever seen. Using forbidden knowledge, techniques that predated human civilization, and a mastery of genetic science that bordered on the divine, he crafted 20 beings, 20 Primarchs. Each one was designed to be a general, a conqueror, as a philosopher king, capable of leading a legion of superhuman warriors across the stars and reuniting the scattered remnants of humanity under a single banner. The Primarchs were not simply grown. They were engineered with such precision and care that each one reflected a different facet of the Emperor's own nature. Some carried his wrath, others his wisdom. Some bore his capacity for compassion, while others inherited his ruthlessness. Each was a masterwork, a living weapon forged from the Emperor's own genetic material and imbued with a fraction of his power. And then, before any of them could draw their first breath, disaster struck. The Chaos Gods, those malevolent intelligences that dwell within the roiling dimension known as the Warp, became aware of what the Emperor was doing. They understood that these Primarchs represented the greatest threat to their dominion that had ever been conceived. And so they reached through the veil between dimensions, and they tore the Primarchs from their gestation capsules, scattering them across the galaxy like seeds thrown to the wind. Each Primarch was cast upon a different world, far from Terra, far from the Emperor, far from the destiny that had been planned for them. Some landed on civilized worlds and grew up among humans. Others crashed upon savage planets where survival was measured in hours rather than years. Or each upbringing shaped the Primarch who emerged from it, molding them into the beings they would become when the Emperor finally found them again. But the 20th capsule contained something that even the Emperor may not have anticipated. When the Chaos Gods ripped the Primarchs from their cradles, something happened to the being designated as the 20th. whether by design, by accident, or by the interference of the warp itself. The 20th Primarch did not emerge as a single entity. He became two. Alfarius and Omegon, twin brothers, identical in every physical way, two bodies housing what they would later describe as a single soul split in half. It is one of the deepest mysteries of the Primarch project. Did the Emperor intend to create twins? Was there always something unique about the 20th capsule, some genetic quirk or deliberate design choice that resulted in two beings instead of one? Or was this the work of the Chaos Gods? As a final act of sabotage that even they may not have fully understood the consequences of? There is a tantalizing detail buried in the lore that hints at the Emperor's possible awareness of the twins' dual nature. When members of the Word-Bearers Legion were shown a vision of the Primarch birthing vaults, the observers noted that Capsule 20 seemed to contain too many limbs. That this could be interpreted as evidence that the Emperor knew all along that the 20th Primarch was actually a pair of twins, and that he chose to keep this knowledge to himself. If true, it raises the possibility that the creation of twin Primarchs was not an accident at all, but a deliberate design choice, a redundancy built into the most important of his creations, ensuring that even if one was lost, the other would remain to carry out the mission. Alternatively, the Emperor may have been genuinely unaware. The Chaos God's interference with the Primarch project was violent and chaotic, literally in the case of the latter, and it is possible that the splitting of the 20th Primarch into twins was an unforeseen consequence of the scattering that even the Emperor's vast intelligence could not have predicted. If this is the case, then the existence of Omegon represents something truly unique in the history of the Imperium. A son of the Emperor who was never planned for, never anticipated, never factored into the grand design. Either way, the result was the same. Two beings, identical in form and power, sharing a psychic bond so deep that they described it as inhabiting the same soul. And when the warp storm that scattered the Primarchs deposited them on different worlds in different corners of the galaxy, that bond was stretched across light years of empty space, reduced to a faint, persistent pull that each twin could feel but neither could explain. The truth is buried beneath layers of secrecy so thick that not even the most senior members of the Inquisition have been able to penetrate them. What we do know, drawn from sources that are themselves of questionable reliability, is that when the Primarchs were scattered, the two halves of the 20th did not land together. They were separated, as cast upon different worlds in different regions of the galaxy, each one unaware that the other existed. Alfarius, according to one account, which he himself claims is a lie, landed on Terra itself, not far from the Emperor's own palace. This version of events, told in the Primarch's own words through the novel Head of the Hydra by Mike Brooks, suggests that Alfarius was actually the first Primarch to be found by the Emperor, not the last. That the Emperor discovered him as an infant on the Jaranam Plateau outside the walls of the Proto-Imperial Palace, and rather than announcing his existence to the galaxy, chose to keep him hidden. A secret weapon, a shadow that would walk behind the other Primarchs, learning their strengths and weaknesses, serving as the Emperor's own hidden blade. According to this account, Alfarius was raised by the Emperor and Malcador the Sigillite in total secrecy. He learned the arts of deception, and of covert warfare, of thinking 3 moves ahead of everyone around him. He was taught that the individual does not matter, that only the whole, only the mission, only the grand design holds any significance, and he was told, explicitly, that his existence must remain a secret from everyone, even from his own brothers. Now, this story might be entirely fabricated. Alfarius was, after all, the galaxy's most accomplished liar. The novel that recounts this tale opens with the words, "I am Alfarius." This is a lie. Everything that follows is filtered through the lens of a narrator who admits to being untrustworthy. But even lies contain fragments of truth, especially when they are told by someone who understands the power of partial honesty. And the account that follows, whatever its ultimate veracity, gives us our first real glimpse into the life of Omegon. Because while Alfarius may have landed close to the heart of power, close to the Emperor and his nascent Imperium. Our Omegon was not so fortunate. Far from terror, far from the light of Sol, far from any world that bore a name or a civilization worth recording, a child opened his eyes for the first time. He was lying on the surface of a planet that seemed to have been forgotten by the universe itself. There were no cities here, no people, no animals, just endless, barren terrain stretching in every direction beneath an alien sky that held no warmth and offered no comfort. This was the world where Omegon would spend the early years of his existence. A nameless, empty world at the edge of explored space, so unremarkable that no cartographer had ever bothered to chart its coordinates. And yet, for all its desolation, this world would leave an indelible mark on the Primarch who grew up upon its surface. Imagine it for a moment, a being of incredible potential, a demigod in the making, waking up alone on a dead planet with no knowledge of who he is, where he came from, or why he exists. The other Primarchs, when scattered by the Chaos Gods, at least had the fortune of landing among people. Lemon Russ was raised by wolves on the death world of Fenris. Vulcan grew up among the hardy people of Nocturne. Even Conrad Kersey, who landed on the nightmare world of Nostramo, had human beings around him, twisted and corrupt as they were. Omegon had nothing, no mentors, no civilization. No one to teach him language or warfare or the meaning of brotherhood. He was utterly, completely alone. And yet he survived. More than survived. He thrived. The accounts of Omegon's time on this nameless world are fragmentary at best, filtered through the same fog of Alpha Legion misdirection that obscures everything about the 20th. What we are told, from the account given in Head of the Hydra, is that despite his isolation, the young Omegon was able to reason through his own existence. He looked at his hands, at his body, at the superhuman capabilities that separated him from any ordinary being, and he deduced something remarkable. He understood that he was not a natural creature. He was manufactured, built, designed for a purpose that he did not yet comprehend, by a creator he had never met. This is worth pausing on, because it tells us something profound about Omegon's character from the very beginning. While other Primarchs grew up believing themselves to be kings, or saw warriors, or chosen ones of prophecy, Omegon began his existence with a cold, analytical understanding of his own nature. He did not mythologize himself. He did not wrap his identity in the legends and cultures of whatever world he happened to land on. He looked at the evidence before him and he drew rational conclusions. He was a weapon. Someone had made him, and someday that someone would come looking for what they had created. During his time alone on this forgotten world, Omegon made a discovery that would have consequences reaching far into the future. Somewhere on the planet's barren surface, buried perhaps in ancient ruins, or hidden in a location that seemed designed to be found by someone of his capabilities, the young Primarch stumbled upon an artifact of extraordinary power. It was a spear, a double-bladed weapon of alien construction, forged from materials and using techniques that predated even the rise of the ancient Eldari civilization, while one of the oldest spacefaring races in the galaxy. When wielded, this weapon flickered and phased in and out of material reality, as if it existed partially in another dimension. It emitted a low, eerie howl that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the boundaries of normal space. And when it struck, it pierced any defense it encountered, any armor, any force field, any physical barrier. The flesh where it touched dissolved into oily, bloodless smoke. It ripped apart at the molecular level by forces that defied conventional physics. This weapon would come to be known as the Pale Spear, or in the ancient tongue, the Sarisanata. Its origins remain one of the unsolved mysteries of the setting. Who built it? What civilization, older than the Eldari themselves, had possessed the knowledge to forge such a thing? And why was it left on a nameless, uninhabited world, as if waiting for someone specific to find it? Well, the Pale Spear was not merely powerful. It was otherworldly in a way that set it apart from every other weapon in the Primarch's considerable arsenals. The other Primarchs carried weapons that were impressive by human standards, mastercrafted power swords and thunderhammers and chainswords of legendary quality. But these were, at their core, comprehensible technologies. Advanced, yes. Deadly, absolutely. But ultimately, the products of human engineering pushed to its theoretical limits. Yes, the pale spear was something else entirely. Its double-bladed form seemed to exist in two places at once, phasing in and out of visibility, as if it occupied more dimensions than the three that human senses could perceive. When it struck armor, it did not simply penetrate, it unmade. The molecular bonds of whatever material it touched were dissolved, not by force or heat, but by some principle of physics that defied categorization. Ceramite, adamantium, even the blessed warding of Terminator plate, all yielded to the pale spear as if they were made of smoke. Against living flesh, the effect was even more disturbing. Wounds inflicted by the spear did not bleed. The tissue at the point of contact simply ceased to exist, dissolved into oily, dark vapor that dissipated in moments. There was no healing from such wounds. No biological process could restore what the spear had unmade. It killed not by damaging the body, but by erasing it, a one strike at a time. This was the weapon that Omegon carried with him through the horrors of Barsaver and into his reunion with his twin. This was the weapon that would eventually be wielded by Alfarius during the Battle of Pluto, where it would pierce the armor of Rogel Dawn and draw blood from the Praetorian of Terror. And this was the weapon whose alien strangeness served as a constant reminder that Omegon had been touched by something outside the boundaries of human understanding. Something older and more alien than the Imperium could comprehend. These are questions that the law does not answer. But the Pale Spear would become one of the most feared weapons in the arsenal of the Alpha Legion's Primarchs, a tool capable of killing beings that were supposed to be unkillable. At some point during his isolation, Omegon's world was visited by outsiders, a group of human pirates, voidfarers, who had been traveling the empty reaches of space and happened upon this barren rock. On arrived on his planet. We do not know the details of what transpired between the young Primarch and these interlopers. What we do know is that Omegon was able to commandeer their vessel, whether through cunning, through force, or through some combination of the two. He stole their ship and used it to escape the world that had been his prison. And so began a long journey. Alone, piloting a stolen vessel through the void, Omegon traveled toward Imperial-held space. Along the way, yet he would have heard the same stories that echoed across every human world in the expanding Imperium. Tales of the Emperor, tales of great warriors called Space Marines who fought in legions, conquering the galaxy in the name of unity and progress. Tales of beings called Primarchs, demigod generals who led these legions and were said to be the sons of the Emperor himself. Omegon would have listened to these stories and understood, perhaps for the first time, exactly what he was. And he was one of these Primarchs, one of these engineered demigods. And somewhere out there, in the vast machinery of the Great Crusade, there was a place waiting for him, a legion that carried his genetic legacy, a father who had built him for a purpose. But Omegon did not rush to announce himself. He did not charge into the heart of the Imperium and declare his identity to the first authority figure he encountered. That was not his nature. Instead, he moved carefully, quietly, gathering information and biding his time. Because there was something else, too, something he could feel but not yet explain. A presence at the edge of his consciousness, a connection to another mind, another being that tugged at him like gravity. He was not complete. There was another half of him out there, somewhere in the galaxy, and until he found that other half, nothing else mattered. Yet the story of how the twin Primarchs finally found each other is one of the most compelling passages in all of Warhammer 40,000 lore, and it unfolds against the backdrop of one of the most devastating conflicts of the Great Crusade, the Rangdan Xenocides. The Rangdan were a Xenos threat so terrible, so existential in their danger to the young Imperium, that even the sanitized histories of the time acknowledged the scale of the horror they represented. Entire sectors of space were consumed. Legions of Space Marines suffered catastrophic losses. The fighting was so brutal and the methods used to achieve victories so extreme that much of the record of the Rangdan genocides has been deliberately suppressed by imperial authorities. What we know is that among the horrors arrayed against humanity during this conflict were creatures called the Slough, beings sometimes referred to as maggot men or worm lords. It's a race of corpse-eating xenos whose very existence seemed to be an affront to the natural order of things. It was into this nightmarish war zone that Alfarius ventured, not to fight the Rangdan, or at least not primarily. His true objective was something far more personal. He had felt the same pull that Omegon had felt, that persistent tug of connection between two halves of a divided soul. He knew his twin was out there, somewhere in the contested space of the Rangdan front, and he was determined to find him. According to the account given in Head of the Hydra, Alfarius arrived at the war zone under the guise of offering aid to the Dark Angels, who were bearing the brunt of the fighting under their Primarch, the Lion. The Alpha Legion, still operating in secret at this time, still unacknowledged by the wider Imperium, sent a representative who identified himself simply as Alfarius, a captain of the 20th Legion, though he was careful to deny being a Primarch. This representative, who may or may not have been the real Alfarius, offered the Lion's forces assistance against the Rangdan in exchange for cooperation. The true purpose, hidden beneath layers of misdirection, was to use the Rangdan war zone as cover for a search and rescue mission. The trail led to a world called Barsaver. It was a hellish place, swarming with Slough and their enslaved client races. The fighting was close quarters and merciless. And Alpha Legion squads pushed deeper and deeper into hostile territory, taking casualties that Alfarius accepted with the cold pragmatism that defined his approach to warfare. Every loss was a price paid for the mission's success. Every fallen legionary brought him one step closer to the thing he had traveled across the galaxy to find. And then, in the middle of that blood-soaked war zone, surrounded by the corpses of alien creatures and the smoking ruins of Xenos fortifications, Alfarius saw a figure standing among the dead, a warrior in power armor that bore no markings, wielding a double-bladed spear that flickered with otherworldly energy. A figure who turned to face him and revealed a face that was a perfect mirror of his own, Omegon. The reunion of the twin Primarchs is described as a moment of profound emotional significance, even by the standards of a narrative that is filtered through the unreliable lens of Alpha Legion misdirection. When the two brothers saw each other for the first time, they experienced something that went beyond simple recognition. It was a feeling of completeness, of a wound being healed that they had not fully realized was there. Two halves of a single soul, separated since birth, finally brought back together. They recognized each other instantly. There was no need for introductions, no period of suspicion or verification. They looked at each other, and they simply knew. This was the other half, as this was the piece that had been missing. Omegon had been fighting on Barsaver alone, battling the Slough and their horrors with nothing but his own skill and the alien weapon he had found on his nameless homeworld. He had survived through sheer determination and the superhuman capabilities that were his birthright as a Primarch. But survival had come at a cost. The years of isolation, the endless fighting, the absence of any companion or confidant. What had shaped Omegon into something different from his twin? Where Alfarius had been raised in the presence of the Emperor, learning the arts of covert warfare within a structured framework of purpose and ideology, Omegon had forged himself in the fires of pure solitude. He was harder in some ways, more pragmatic, and perhaps, in the depths that mattered most, more human. Because Omegon had learned something on that nameless world, and in the killing fields of Barsaver that Alfarius, war for all his brilliance, had never been forced to confront. The Slough themselves deserve a moment of attention here, because they help illustrate the kind of adversity that shaped Omegon during his time on Barsaver. The Slough were not ordinary Xenos. They were beings of alien intelligence and horrifying biology, creatures that consumed the dead and manipulated corpses like puppets, using the bodies of their victims as tools and weapons. They were ancient, perhaps older than the Aeldari, and they possessed a cold, calculating malice that made them one of the most dangerous threats the early Imperium ever faced. The fact that the Rangdan Xenocides, the campaign in which they were the primary antagonist, resulted in the near destruction of at least one Space Marine Legion and the loss of entire sectors of space gives some indication of the scale of the horror they represented. Omegon faced these creatures alone, without a legion, without support, or without even the knowledge that help existed somewhere in the galaxy. He fought them with the pale spear, with his own fists, with whatever he could improvise from the wreckage of the world around him. And he did not just survive, he held them at bay. He carved out a space of safety in the middle of a war zone that was consuming entire civilizations. This tells us something essential about Omegon's character that goes beyond the usual Primarch narratives of martial prowess and tactical genius. It tells us that Omegon possessed a quality that is rare among demigods: resilience. Not the physical resilience that all Primarchs share, the ability to shrug off wounds that would kill ordinary men 100 times over, but emotional resilience, the ability to endure suffering, isolation, and despair without breaking, the ability to keep fighting when there is no logical reason to believe that fighting will change anything. This quality would serve him well in the years to come, when the choices he was forced to make would have broken a lesser being. He had learned what it meant to be truly alone. This is a crucial point of divergence between the two brothers, and it shaped everything that would follow. Alfarius had been raised in the most privileged environment imaginable, surrounded by the greatest minds in the Imperium, with access to the resources and knowledge of an entire civilization. He had never wanted for companionship, for mentorship, for purpose, or every day of his existence had been structured around the development of his abilities and the refinement of his understanding of warfare, politics, and the nature of the Imperium he was being groomed to serve. Omegon had none of this. He had raised himself. Every skill he possessed, every insight he had gained, every strategy he had developed for dealing with the hostile universe around him had been learned through trial and error, through observation and deduction, through the kind of hard-won wisdom that only comes from having no one to fall back on when things go wrong. This gave Omegon a certain quality that Alfarius lacked, a groundedness, an understanding of vulnerability and mortality that most Primarchs, with their godlike powers and their certainty of purpose, never had the opportunity to develop. Alfarius understood warfare as an intellectual exercise. He had been taught its principles by the greatest strategist in human history. Omegon understood warfare as survival. He had lived it, alone, on a dead world, with nothing but his wits and a strange alien weapon to keep him alive. This difference would eventually become the hairline fracture that divided them. But that fracture lay in the future. For now, the young Omegon was simply trying to survive, and he was extraordinarily good at it. After their reunion, the twins made several decisions that would define their relationship and their role within the Imperium for the rest of their existence. First, and most importantly, they agreed to keep the existence of their dual nature a secret. As far as the galaxy was concerned, there was only one Primarch of the 20th Legion. His name was Alfarius. Omegon would remain hidden, operating in the shadows, commanding portions of the Alpha Legion without anyone outside the 20th ever knowing that a second Primarch existed. This was a decision of staggering implications. Every other legion had a single Primarch, a known and acknowledged leader whose identity was a matter of public record. The Alpha Legion would have two, and the existence of the second would be guarded more closely than any other secret in the Imperium. Not even the Emperor, it was speculated, was fully aware of the truth. Though some accounts suggest he may have known all along and simply chose not to acknowledge it. The twins also orchestrated the manner in which the 20th Legion's Primarch would be officially discovered by the Imperium. It was Omegon, not Alfarius, who boarded the Vengeful Spirit, the flagship of Horus Lupercal, the Warmaster of the Great Crusade. It was Omegon who fought his way to the bridge, demonstrating his combat prowess by defeating several Lunar Wolves Space Marines before Horus intervened. And it was Omegon who, standing before the Warmaster, spoke the words that would become the most famous declaration in Alpha Legion history. "I am Alfarius." It was, of course, a lie. The very first words that the 20th Primarch officially spoke to the wider Imperium were untrue, and in that single moment of calculated deception, the nature of everything the Alpha Legion would become was made clear. Truth and falsehood were not opposing forces to be kept separate. They were tools, interchangeable and equally useful, to be deployed as the situation demanded. From that point forward, the twin Primarchs operated as a single entity with two bodies. Alfarius was the public face, the Primarch who attended war councils and clashed with his brothers over matters of strategy and doctrine. Omegon was the shadow, as the hidden hand that directed covert operations, managed intelligence networks, and executed the plans that Alfarius devised. They could switch roles seamlessly, and they did so frequently. On multiple occasions throughout the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy, the Primarch who appeared before other legions and imperial officials as Alfarius was actually Omegon wearing his brother's identity. And the being referred to as Omegon in internal Alpha Legion communications could just as easily have been Alfarius operating under his twin's designation. The confusion was deliberate. The interchangeability was weaponized. Because if you cannot tell which head of the Hydra you are dealing with, you cannot predict what it will do next. With their reunion complete and their roles established, Alfarius and Omegon threw themselves into the Great Crusade with the fervor of Primarchs who had something to prove. The Alpha Legion was the youngest of the 20 legions, the last to receive its Primarch, and it carried the weight of that distinction like a chip on its collective shoulder. The other legions looked upon the 20th with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. They were the newcomers, the untested, the unknown quantity. And the methods they employed to wage war only deepened the suspicion. The Alpha Legion did not fight like other Space Marine legions, where the Ultramarines favored disciplined, codified approaches to warfare, where the Space Wolves relied on savage ferocity, where the Imperial Fists excelled in the construction and defense of fortifications. The Alpha Legion operated according to an entirely different philosophy, as they believed that the greatest victory was one achieved before the first shot was fired. That warfare was not merely a contest of arms, but a game of information, deception, and psychological manipulation. Under the direction of both their Primarchs, the Alpha Legion developed a style of warfare that was unprecedented among the Legion's Astartes. They maintained vast networks of human operatives, augmented agents known as Sparatoi, and who were embedded within enemy populations long before the Alpha Legion ever arrived on a world. These agents would spend months or even years cultivating relationships, gathering intelligence, identifying weaknesses, and laying the groundwork for the moment when the Legion would strike.
Now, before we keep going, I just want to say this real quick. The whole Cabal situation is probably my favorite piece of Alpha Legion lore, and honestly one of the reasons I wanted to cover Omegon specifically instead of just doing, a general Alfarius video. Because the thing that gets me is that Omegon clearly did not fully buy what the Cabal was selling. You could feel it in the way the lore frames his reactions versus his brothers, and that tension, that quiet disagreement between two people who literally share a soul is way more interesting to me than any Voltor fight. It makes him feel real, like he's carrying something heavy and can't put it down. But anyway, that's just my 2 cents. Let's continue the video.
By the time the Alpha Legion's warships appeared in orbit, the enemy's defenses had often already been compromised from within. Command structures had been subverted, supply lines had been severed, with key leaders had been assassinated or turned. The population was riven with confusion and mistrust. And then the hammer fell. The Alpha Legion would attack from multiple directions simultaneously, in a devastating coordinated assault known as a harrowing. Enemies who had been softened by weeks of covert operations found themselves overwhelmed by Space Marines striking from angles they never anticipated, using tactics that seemed to anticipate their every response. And it was war waged as a chess master wages it. Every move planned 5 steps ahead, every contingency accounted for, every avenue of escape sealed shut before the target even realized they were trapped. This approach made the Alpha Legion phenomenally effective. Their record of successful compliance operations during the Great Crusade was formidable. but it also made them deeply unpopular among their brother legions. Many Primarchs viewed the Alpha Legion's reliance on deception as dishonorable. Or Leman Russ of the Space Wolves openly criticized them for their unwillingness to fight what he considered a clean, honest war. Rogel Dawn of the Imperial Fists regarded their methods with barely concealed contempt. Even Reboot Gilliman, who prided himself on his strategic acumen, found Alfarius's approach to warfare infuriating, dismissing the Alpha Legion's overcomplicated operations as a pointless waste of resources. There is a famous incident that illustrates this tension perfectly. But during one campaign, the Alpha Legion was tasked with bringing a world into compliance. Rather than launching a direct assault, which would have been straightforward given their available forces, Alfarius chose to wage a prolonged campaign of deception, sabotage, and misdirection that lasted far longer than necessary. The defenders suffered 90% casualties, devastated by ambushes, supply disruptions, and psychological warfare that eroded their will to fight long before the final attack was launched. When asked afterward why the Legion had not simply taken the direct approach, Alfarius reportedly replied that they had avoided it because it would have been too easy. This incident drew censure from nearly every Primarch who learned of it. Only Horus, the War Master, praised the Alpha Legion's skill. Horus had always been impressed by Alfarius, fascinated by his cunning and his willingness to operate outside the conventions that bound the other legions. It was a relationship that would have fateful consequences. But behind the public face of the Alpha Legion's campaigns, behind the tactical brilliance and the operational audacity, Omegon was conducting a different kind of war entirely. While Alfarius handled the broad strokes, the grand strategies and the high-level coordination, Omegon directed the Legion's most sensitive covert operations. He ran the Black Ops Division, the Headhunter kill teams, the deep cover infiltration missions that were too delicate or too dangerous for conventional forces. He was the spy master within the Spy Master's Legion, operating at a level of secrecy that even most Alpha Legionaries were not fully aware of. And it was in this role, this quiet, hidden function, as that Omegon began to distinguish himself from his twin in ways that would ultimately have enormous consequences for the galaxy. The relationship between the twins and their brother Primarchs was complicated, to say the least. Most of the other sons of the Emperor viewed the Alpha Legion with suspicion. Conrad Kersey of the Night Lords openly criticized their tactics, calling them sinners hiding behind a shroud of lies. A Rogel Dawn and Robuta Gilliman both found their methods distasteful and their results, while impressive, achieved through means they considered beneath the dignity of a Space Marine Legion. Even the barbarian Primarchs, like Russ and the Khan, who were themselves unconventional warriors, found the Alpha Legion's obsessive secrecy difficult to stomach. Only Horus appreciated what the Alpha Legion brought to the table. The War Master saw in Alfarius a kindred spirit, a mind that understood warfare as a multi-dimensional game rather than a simple contest of force. Horus praised the Alpha Legion's achievements when other Primarchs condemned them. He championed their methods when others dismissed them. And it was this relationship, this singular connection between the youngest Primarch and the oldest, that would have the most devastating consequences of all. Because when Horus fell to chaos, when he began his rebellion against the Emperor, his influence over Alfarius gave the dark forces of the Warp a lever they could use against the twins. But that lever would not have worked on its own. It took something else, something far more sophisticated than simple corruption or temptation, to turn the Alpha Legion against the Imperium. It took the Cabal. There is another element of the twins' relationship with their brother Primarchs that deserves attention because it illuminates the nature of Omegon's character. In the novel Head of the Hydra, the Primarch who narrates the story, seemingly Alfarius, offers candid assessments of his brothers that are both insightful and revealing. He describes Gilliman as brilliant but insufferably self-assured, a man who believed he had solved the problems of warfare and could write the solutions down while doing so. He describes Dawn as trustworthy but dangerous precisely because he never lied, making him impossible to predict through the usual methods of deception. He describes the Lion as the Primarch most like himself, sharing a natural affinity for secrecy and a willingness to operate outside conventional boundaries. These assessments are fascinating because they reveal a mind that is constantly evaluating, constantly calculating, constantly mapping the strengths and weaknesses of everyone around it. This is not the thought process of a warrior. It is the thought process of a spy master, and it is a quality that both twins shared, though they applied it in different ways. Alfarius used his understanding of his brothers to outmaneuver them. Omegon used his understanding of his brothers to anticipate how they would react to the Alpha Legion's provocations, and to ensure that those reactions served whatever deeper purpose he was pursuing. Because despite their shared soul, despite their identical appearance and their interchangeable identities, Alfarius and Omegon were not the same person. They had been shaped by different experiences, forged in different fires. Alfarius, raised by the Emperor and Malcador, had internalized a worldview that was cold, calculating, and ruthlessly pragmatic. The mission was everything. Individual lives, even the lives of his own legionaries, were acceptable losses in pursuit of the greater objective. Omegon is shaped by the isolation of his nameless world and the brutal reality of survival on Bar Saver, carried a different perspective. He was pragmatic too, make no mistake. You do not survive alone on a hostile world by being sentimental. But there was a thread of something else woven into Omegon's character, a quality that hinted at a deeper capacity for empathy, for doubt, for the kind of moral questioning that Alfarius seemed to have discarded. It was a hairline fracture in the bond between the twins, barely visible, easy to dismiss. But like all fractures, it had the potential to widen under pressure, and pressure was coming. Approximately 2 standard years before the outbreak of the Horus Heresy, the deadliest civil war in human history, the twin Primarchs encountered something that would force them to make the most consequential decision of their existence. As the Alpha Legion was conducting a campaign of Imperial compliance on a world called Nurth, when they were approached by a man named John Grammaticus. Grammaticus was not an ordinary human. He was a perpetual, a rare type of mutant whose consciousness persisted through death, allowing him to be reborn again and again across the millennia. He had lived for thousands of years. He had seen civilizations rise and fall, and he served as an agent for an organization that called itself the Cabal. The Cabal was unlike anything the Imperium had ever encountered. It was a vast, ancient alliance of diverse alien species, led primarily by the Aeldari, but comprising individuals drawn from over 1,000 different intelligent races. The Cabal claimed to have been fighting the forces of the primordial annihilator, their name for chaos, since before humanity had evolved the capacity for complex thought. They were scholars of fate, masters of a form of enhanced psychic far-seeing called the acuity, which allowed them to peer into possible futures with a clarity and depth that surpassed even the prophetic abilities of Aeldari farseers. And the Cabal had a warning. Through the power of the acuity, they had studied the Primarchs. They had observed their development, their personalities, their relationships with one another, and with the Emperor. They had mapped the currents of fate that flowed around these demigods. And they had reached a conclusion that shook the twin Primarchs to their core. The Cabal identified 2 Primarchs as the most pivotal figures in the coming crisis. The first was Horus, the oldest, the War Master, the one the Chaos Gods had chosen as their instrument. The second was Alfarius Omegon, the youngest, the hidden, the last. The Cabal claimed that what Horus would do, Alfarius would undo. That the Alpha Legion was uniquely positioned to determine the outcome of the catastrophe that was about to engulf the galaxy. And then they showed the twins 2 visions. In the first vision, the Alpha Legion remained loyal to the Emperor. They fought alongside the Loyalist legions against Horus and his traitors. And the Emperor won. Horus was defeated, but the Emperor was mortally wounded in the process, entombed upon the Golden Throne, neither alive nor dead. The Imperium would survive, but it would stagnate. It would rot from within over the course of 10 to 20,000 years, decaying slowly until chaos returned resurgent and consumed humanity entirely. This was the slow death, the long sunset, humanity preserved in the short term, but ultimately doomed. In the second vision, the Alpha Legion joined Horus. They fought against the Emperor, and Horus won. The Emperor was slain, but afterward, a remnant of the man Horus had once been, a shard of nobility buried deep within his corrupted soul, would consume him with guilt and self-loathing. Within 2 to 3 generations, Horus would turn his fury upon his own followers, destroying the forces of chaos from within, annihilating himself and humanity in the process. This was the fast death. Humanity would be extinguished, but chaos would be destroyed along with it, freeing the galaxy from its influence forever. The Cabal asked the twins to choose: to sacrifice humanity in order to destroy chaos, or to preserve humanity and condemn the galaxy to an eternity of suffering. The weight of this choice is difficult to overstate. The Cabal was asking 2 Primarchs, 2 sons of the Emperor, to betray everything they had been created to protect, to side with the enemy, to ensure that the father who had built them was defeated and killed, all in the name of a greater good so vast, so cosmic in its scope, that individual human lives became meaningless points of data in a calculation spanning millennia. And here, in this moment of impossible decision, the fracture between the twins began to widen. The lore suggests that Alpharius was the more willing of the two to accept the Cabal's logic. He was the pragmatist, the one who had been trained by the Emperor himself to think in terms of long-term objectives and acceptable sacrifices. Yet, if the destruction of humanity was the price of destroying chaos forever, then perhaps that was a price worth paying. It was, he reasoned, the choice the Emperor himself would make if presented with the same information. Omegon was less certain. The accounts differ on the precise nature of his reservations, but the pattern that emerges across multiple sources is one of a Primarch who was deeply uncomfortable with the idea of condemning the very species he had been created to protect. Omegon had grown up alone. He had survived without the guidance of the Emperor or Malcador or anyone else. He had fought his way across a hostile galaxy, using nothing but his own will and his own judgment. And something about the Cabal's neat, binary vision of the future did not sit right with him. Were there really only 2 possible outcomes? Could the future not be shaped into something else entirely, some third path that the Cabal's acuity had failed to foresee? Was it wise to trust the visions of an alien organization that, however ancient and knowledgeable it might be, had its own agenda and its own biases? These questions gnawed at Omegon. They planted seeds of doubt that would grow and flourish in the years to come. But in the immediate term, the twins reached a compromise. They agreed, apparently, to join Horus, to side with the traitors, to work toward the destruction of the Emperor and by extension the destruction of chaos. And it is worth examining why this choice was so agonizing, and why it continues to be debated by fans of the setting to this day. The Cabal was not offering the twins a simple choice between good and evil. They were offering a choice between 2 different kinds of catastrophe. In the first outcome, the Emperor wins, but humanity is condemned to a slow, grinding decline that ends in total annihilation by chaos. In the second, Horus wins and humanity is destroyed quickly. But chaos is destroyed along with it, sparing the rest of the galaxy. Neither option is acceptable by any conventional moral standard. Both involve the extinction of the human race. The only difference is the timeline and the collateral damage. And it is precisely this impossible dilemma that makes the Alpha Legion's decision so fascinating, because it reveals the fundamental philosophical difference between the twins. Alpharius, the pragmatist, approached the problem as an equation. If humanity is doomed regardless, then the optimal outcome is the one that minimizes total suffering across the galaxy. A quick death that destroys chaos is mathematically preferable to a slow death that allows chaos to grow stronger and eventually consume everything. Omegon, the survivor, approached the problem as a warrior who had spent his entire early life fighting against seemingly impossible odds. He had been alone on a dead world and he had survived. And he had faced alien horrors on Barsaver and he had survived. Every experience in his life told him that survival was always possible, even when the odds said otherwise. The Cabal's vision of the future was compelling, but it was not certain. It was a probability, not a destiny. And Omegon, who had defied probability his entire life, was not ready to accept that there was no way out of the trap. According to Dan Abnett, as the author who first introduced the Cabal and Omegon's existence in the Horus Heresy novel Legion, the twins were not fooled by the Cabal. They were not manipulated or deceived. They made their decision with full awareness of what they were doing and why. The Cabal presented them with information, and the twins chose how to act on that information based on their own judgment. This is an important distinction, because it means that whatever the Alpha Legion did during the heresy, they did it by choice, not because they were pawns of alien manipulation, but because two of the most intelligent beings in the galaxy weighed the evidence and decided, however reluctantly, that the Cabal's plan was worth attempting. But they would do it on their own terms, not as servants of the Cabal, not as puppets of alien manipulation. They would use the Cabal's intelligence for their own purposes, pursue their own objectives, and maintain the freedom to change course if the situation demanded it. This was not blind obedience to a prophecy. It was a calculated gamble, a bet placed on the longest odds imaginable, with the fate of the galaxy as the stakes. After the Alpha Legion had completed one of the Cabal's early objectives, a mission involving the theft of pure Primarch gene stock from the Raven Guard, in which Omegon played a central role, Omegon made a decision that would define his relationship with the Cabal for the remainder of the heresy. He met with the Cabal's representative, an alien called Athithirtir, aboard his ship. The exchange was brief and terse, and when it was over, Omegon delivered a message that left no room for ambiguity. The 20th Legion would fulfill its obligations on its own, without external influence, without interference, without control. He then left the Cabal representative behind and departed, effectively cutting ties with the organization that had set this entire chain of events in motion. It was a declaration of independence, a statement that whatever the Alpha Legion did from this point forward, they would do because they chose to, not because some collection of alien prophets told them to. And it was, in hindsight, one of the first clear signs that Omegon was charting his own course. A course that might not align with his brothers. A course that might not align with anyone's. Whilst the Horus Heresy erupted like a wound torn open in the fabric of reality, brother turned against brother, legions that had fought side by side for centuries now met on the killing fields of 100 worlds, their weapons turned upon the very comrades they had bled with. The galaxy burned, and in the middle of this inferno, the Alpha Legion operated according to its own inscrutable agenda. On the surface, the 20th Legion appeared to be a traitor force. They had declared for Horus. Yet they participated in the Dropsite massacre on Istvan V, one of the most devastating betrayals in human history, where 3 loyalist legions, the Iron Hands, the Raven Guard, and the Salamanders, were nearly annihilated in a trap sprung by the traitor legions. The Alpha Legion's involvement in this atrocity seemed to confirm their allegiance to the War Master, beyond any doubt. But nothing about the Alpha Legion was ever what it seemed, because while one arm of the 20th was carrying out operations that served the traitor cause, another arm, operating independently, was engaged in activities that looked suspiciously like loyalist sabotage. The most illuminating example of this dual nature occurred in the Kondax system, where the White Scars Legion, under their Primarch Jaghatai Khan, had been engaged in a campaign against Orc forces. Yes, the Alpha Legion had been ordered by Horus to block the White Scars from leaving Kondax and joining the Loyalist forces on Terra. The instructions were clear: keep the Khan occupied, recruit him to the traitor cause if possible, and under no circumstances allow the White Scars to reach the throne world. The Alpha Legion deployed a fleet to the Kondax system. they blockaded the White Scars. But they cut off their communications using a nearby array of ancient Xenos constructs similar to Necron pylons, which suppressed warp activity in the surrounding space and prevented astropathic messages from reaching the Khan. And then something strange happened. Omegon dispatched a squad of Alpha Legion special operatives, an Efrit stealth squad led by a legionary named Sheed Ranko, on a suicide mission to destroy the very pylon array that was keeping the White Scars isolated. But the official justification was that the facility had been compromised, that it was leaking intelligence to the enemy and needed to be eliminated. But this explanation was almost certainly a fabrication, a cover story manufactured by Omegon to justify an action that served a very different purpose. With the pylon array destroyed, the warp settled. Astropathic communications became possible again, and through this freshly opened channel, a message reached Jagatai Khan from Rogel Dawn on Terra, and a message warning of Horus's betrayal and ordering the White Scars to return to the throne world immediately. This was not an accident. This was not a coincidence. Omegon had deliberately ensured that the White Scars received the intelligence they needed to make an informed choice about which side of the war to join. He had sacrificed Alpha Legion operatives, destroyed Alpha Legion assets, and undermined his own Legion's mission in order to give a loyalist Primarch the information he needed to remain loyal. When the White Scars attempted to leave the system, they encountered the Alpha Legion fleet that had been positioned to block them. But the fleet's behavior was peculiar. Instead of opening communications and attempting to recruit the White Scars as Horus had ordered, the Alpha Legion attacked with an ineffectual force, and deploying only their escort vessels while holding back their capital ships. The attack was aggressive enough to provoke the White Scars into a fighting retreat, but weak enough that the Khan's fleet was able to break through and escape. It was a performance. A theatre production designed to look like a genuine attempt at blockade, while actually allowing the White Scars to escape. The Alpha Legion, or at least the elements of it under Omegon's control, it had engineered the entire scenario to ensure that Jagatai Khan and his warriors would reach Terra and fight for the Emperor. This was not the behavior of a traitor legion. This was the behavior of a force that was playing both sides of the war simultaneously, serving the traitor cause with one hand while undermining it with the other. And it strongly suggests that Omegon, whatever his brother might have thought, was operating according to his own agenda. An agenda that looked increasingly like secret loyalty to the Imperium. There is a deeply poignant dimension to what Omegon was doing during this period that often gets overlooked in discussions about the Alpha Legion's tactical maneuvering. Consider the emotional reality of his situation. He was a Primarch who had been created to serve the Emperor, who had spent the entirety of the Great Crusade fighting to expand the Imperium, and who was now, nominally at least, fighting to tear that Imperium apart. Every operation he conducted that served the traitor cause was a betrayal of everything he had been built to do. And every covert action he took to undermine the traitors was a betrayal of his twin brother, the other half of his soul, who had committed fully to the Cabal's plan. Omegon was caught between two loyalties: loyalty to his brother and loyalty to his father. A loyalty to the mission he had agreed to undertake, and loyalty to the instinct that told him the mission was wrong. He was fighting a war on multiple fronts, not just against the enemies of the Imperium and the enemies of Horus, but against himself, against the divided nature of his own consciousness. This internal conflict played out in the most visible way through the Alpha Legion's inconsistent behavior during the heresy. One day they were traitors, here striking at loyalist forces with devastating efficiency. The next, they were something else entirely, subtly ensuring that loyalist forces survived encounters that should have destroyed them. The pattern was so erratic, so seemingly contradictory, that neither side could determine with certainty whose cause the Alpha Legion actually served, which was, of course, exactly what Omegon wanted. If both sides are uncertain about your loyalties, and neither side will commit the resources necessary to destroy you. If both sides believe you might be working for them, both sides will tolerate your presence, give you access to their intelligence, and allow you to operate in spaces that would otherwise be denied to you. Omegon had weaponized ambiguity itself, turning the Alpha Legion's uncertain loyalty into a strategic asset that gave him freedom of movement that no other force on either side of the heresy enjoyed. The Raven Guard operation is another crucial example of this dual nature. After the drop site massacre on Istvan V, where the Raven Guard had been nearly wiped out, their Primarch Corvus Corax returned to the Raven Guard homeworld of Deliverance to rebuild his shattered legion. The Emperor himself had given Corax access to the pure Primarch gene stock, the original genetic template from which all the Primarchs had been created, to accelerate the process of creating new Astartes. As this was one of the most valuable assets in the entire Imperium, the pure gene stock represented the pinnacle of the Emperor's biological engineering, the key to creating space marines of unparalleled quality. If it fell into the wrong hands, the consequences could be catastrophic. The Alpha Legion infiltrated the Raven Guard. Under Omegon's direction, Alpha Legionaries who had been surgically altered to resemble dead Raven Guard members were inserted into the surviving forces on Istvan V. These agents worked their way into Corax's inner circle, gathering intelligence on the Gene Stock project and eventually sabotaging it from within. But here is the critical detail. When the Alpha Legion finally recovered the pure Primarch gene stock and the research data associated with it, they did not give it to Horus, or rather, they gave Horus data that was, in the words of the law, practically useless and incomplete at best. The real data, the valuable material, it was retained by the Alpha Legion for their own use. They had stolen the Imperium's most precious genetic secret, but they had ensured that neither the traitors nor the loyalists could benefit from it. Only the Alpha Legion had the real information. This was not the action of a legion serving Horus. This was the action of a legion that was building its own power base, independent of both sides, in preparation for whatever came after the heresy. And it was Omegon who orchestrated the key elements of this operation, demonstrating a level of strategic thinking that operated on a fundamentally different plane than the conventional warfare being waged around him. The evidence for Omegon's covert loyalist activities extends beyond the Kondax incident. The Alpha Legion's first major victory in the heresy was the capture of the Forge world of Paramar. But the world was left in such a ruinous state that Horus was forced to garrison it with significant forces that had been earmarked for other critical war zones. When Horus confronted Alfarius about this, the encrypted response was a cryptic phrase: "The devil is not mocked." This is a reference to an old proverb, the full version of which goes, "When evil faces evil, the devil is not mocked." The meaning is clear. Just because two forces are both opposed to the Imperium does not mean they are on the same side. It was a coded warning to Horus that the Alpha Legion was not his to command. During the heresy itself, the twins appeared to be operating with increasing independence from one another. Alfarius, or at least the Primarch publicly acting under that name, carried out operations that genuinely advanced the traitor cause. He launched attacks against the Space Wolves at the Alaxes Nebula, causing significant damage to Leman Russ's battered legion. He orchestrated the infiltration of the Sol system, planting sleeper cells and covert operatives throughout the heart of the Imperium in preparation for the eventual assault on Terra. But Omegon, the hidden twin, appeared to be pursuing a parallel agenda, one that involved preserving loyalist forces, undermining the traitor war effort from within, and ensuring that certain critical pieces remained on the board even as the galaxy burned around them. The suicide mission to destroy the pylon array, the deliberate weakness of the blockade at Kondax, the sabotage of the Primarch gene stock data that was handed to Horus, ensuring that the traitors received useless, incomplete information, while the Alpha Legion retained the valuable material for themselves. It was a war within a war, a shadow conflict fought between two brothers who shared a soul but could no longer agree on how to save it. The breaking point came at Pluto. As the Horus heresy entered its final phase, the War Master charged the Alpha Legion with the critical task of preparing the Sol system for invasion. While Horus's main forces gathered for the final push to Terra, Alfarius was to use his legion's talents for infiltration and sabotage to soften the throne world's defenses, sow confusion throughout the Sol system, and disable the surveillance networks that formed the outer ring of Rogel Dawn's defensive strategy. Alfarius threw himself into this mission with characteristic audacity. The Alpha Legion had been planning for this moment for years, perhaps even decades. Sleeper cells that had been planted on Terra and throughout the Sol system long before the heresy began were activated, unleashing a wave of terrorist attacks, sabotage operations, and targeted killings that rocked the Imperial capital. A freighter was detonated over Terra itself, killing millions. The Damocles starport was devastated. Uprisings erupted on Triton. The entire system was thrown into chaos. But all of this was a diversion, a magician's wave of the hand, designed to draw attention away from Alfarius's true objective. His target was Pluto, or more specifically, Pluto's moon Hydra, a home to the primary astropathic monitoring station that served as the linchpin of Terra's surveillance network. If Hydra fell, Terra would be blinded. The Loyalists would lose their ability to monitor the outer reaches of the system, and Horus's invasion fleet could approach without early warning. Alfarius led the attack personally. His fleet, over 200 warships strong, had spent an entire year drifting toward the Sol system in total silence. All systems powered down to minimal operation, their crews in stasis to reduce heat signatures. It was an infiltration on a scale that beggared belief, an entire armada sneaking through the most heavily defended star system in the galaxy, like a knife slipping between the ribs of a sleeping giant. The battle that followed was brutal and complex, fought across Pluto and its moons with the fate of the Imperium hanging in the balance. Alpha Legion operatives, headhunter kill teams, and entire companies of legionaries assaulted Loyalist positions while sleeper agents sowed chaos behind the lines. The fighting on Hydra was particularly fierce, as Alfarius himself led the spearhead aimed at silencing the astropathic choir. To fully appreciate the scale and audacity of what Alfarius attempted at Pluto, you need to understand the context of the defenses he was assaulting. Rogel Dawn had spent years fortifying the Sol system. The man who was acknowledged as the greatest builder of fortifications among the Primarchs had turned the entire system into a layered defensive network of unprecedented sophistication. Every planet, every moon, every asteroid of strategic value had been turned into a weapons platform or a sensor station. The fleets of the Imperial Fists patrolled established lanes of approach. Kill zones had been calculated with mathematical precision. The Sol system was, in every sense that mattered, as a fortress that spanned an entire star system. And Alfarius had spent a year drifting through it in total silence, slipping through the gaps between Dawn's defenses like water through stone. It was a masterwork of infiltration, a demonstration of the Alpha Legion's capabilities that should have been impossible, and yet, through patience, discipline, and a level of operational security that bordered on the inhuman, succeeded. The Alpha Legion had even managed to infiltrate the Imperial Palace itself. A team of operatives, including possibly Alfarius himself, operating under a mind-wiped cover identity, penetrated the Investory, the sacred hall where statues of all 20 Primarchs stood in solemn tribute to the Emperor's sons. The Alpha Legion destroyed every statue except 2, those of Alfarius and Rogel Dawn. It was a message, a challenge, a declaration that the Alpha Legion had walked into the heart of the Imperium's power and could have done anything they wished. Dawn was furious but disciplined. He kept the desecration of the Investory secret from even Malkador, the Sigillite, and the Custodes, determined to deal with the Alpha Legion's incursion personally. The pride of the Praetorian of Terra had been wounded, and Rogel Dawn was not a man who forgot such wounds easily. And then Rogel Dawn arrived, the Praetorian of Terra, and aboard the massive Star Fortress Phalanx, executed a daring gravitational slingshot maneuver that propelled his fleet to the edge of the system far faster than anyone had thought possible. The Imperial Fists fell upon the Alpha Legion fleet with devastating force, and Dawn himself teleported directly to the surface of Hydra, where Alfarius was engaged in the final stages of his assault. The two Primarchs met face to face, brother against brother. But the Lord of Fortifications against the Lord of Deception. Alfarius spoke to Dawn, not with the words of a traitor boasting of victory, but with something that sounded almost like a plea. He told Dawn that he was not doing this for Horus. He spoke of the future, of a bigger picture, of victories that transcended the immediate conflict. He urged Dawn to understand, to see beyond the battle to the deeper game being played. But Rogel Dawn was not a man given to nuance. He was the wall, the unyielding fortress. He did not listen. He attacked. The duel was savage. Alfarius fought with the pale spear, that ancient alien weapon discovered by Omegon on his nameless world. He stabbed Dawn multiple times, the spear piercing the Praetorian's armor and flesh. But Dawn was relentless, ignoring his wounds with the stoic determination that defined his character. When Alfarius prepared to deliver a killing blow, aiming to impale Dawn through the chest, the Imperial Fist's Primarch did something unexpected. He stepped into the strike. He allowed the pale spear to pierce his shoulder, using his own body to pin the weapon in place. And then, with his free hand, he seized the spear's haft. What followed was swift and terrible. Dawn sliced through Alfarius's wrists with his chainsword, severing the Primarch's hands from his arms. He slashed across Alfarius's chest. He stabbed his brother with the pale spear. Yet the weapon's own power turned against its wielder. And finally, Dawn drove his chainsword, Storm's teeth, into the top of Alfarius's skull, splitting it apart. Alfarius died on the frozen surface of Hydra, surrounded by the wreckage of his plans and the bodies of his fallen warriors. Far across the galaxy, Omegon felt the moment of his brother's death like a blade driven into his own heart. The bond between them, that psychic connection that had linked their consciousness since the moment of their creation, was severed in an instant. For the first time in his existence, Omegon was alone, truly alone, not the solitude of his nameless world, where he had always sensed the distant pull of his twin's mind. This was absolute, final. The other half of his soul was gone, and nothing in the universe could bring it back. Accounts describe Omegon as becoming distant and withdrawn in the aftermath of Alfarius's death. He retreated into himself, processing a grief that no other being in the galaxy could comprehend. He was the only creature in existence who knew what it felt like to lose half of your soul. But grief, in a Primarch, is not the same as paralysis. Omegon may have been wounded, but he was not broken, and in the absence of his twin, he made a decision that would define the remainder of his existence, and he assumed the identity of Alfarius. From this moment forward, the being who had spent his entire existence as the hidden twin, the shadow, the secret that the Alpha Legion guarded above all others, became the public face of the Legion. He wore his dead brother's name like armor. He spoke with his dead brother's voice. He gave orders in his dead brother's name. And no one outside the Alpha Legion, not the traitors, not the loyalists, not even the other Primarchs, knew that the being they were dealing with was not the Primarch they thought he was. It was the ultimate act of deception, the ultimate sacrifice of identity. Omegon did not merely assume his brother's role, he erased himself. The being called Omegon ceased to exist in any meaningful sense. There was only Alfarius now, and the grief that Omegon carried, the loss of the only being in the universe who had truly understood him, it was sealed away behind a mask of cold efficiency and relentless purpose. Think about what this means on a personal level. Omegon had spent the first part of his life utterly alone, yearning for a connection he could feel, but not find. He had traveled across the galaxy to find his twin, his other half, the one being who could make him feel complete. And then, after years of fighting side by side, of sharing a soul and a purpose and a vision for the future, as that connection had been severed by the blade of Rogel Dawn's chainsword, now he was alone again. But this time, the loneliness was worse, because before he had always known his twin was out there somewhere. Now there was nothing, just an empty space where half his soul used to be. And the only way he could honor his fallen brother was to become him, to carry his name forward into the darkness, to ensure that the Hydra's remaining head continued to strike even after the other had been cut away. And it was an act of love in its own strange, cold Alpha Legion way. And it may have been the most human thing Omegon ever did. With Alfarius dead and Omegon now wearing his brother's name, the Alpha Legion's role in the closing stages of the Horus heresy took on a different character. And the actions of the surviving twin, masquerading as the fallen one, tell a fascinating story of a Primarch charting his own course through the wreckage of a galactic civil war. One of the most telling moments came at Olenor, where the traitor forces gathered for the final push toward Terra. Omegon, posing as Alfarius, appeared alone at the War Master's muster. No other Alpha Legion forces were present. How the Primarch had even reached Olenor without a fleet was a mystery that none of the other traitors could explain. Standing before Horus in his command tent, Omegon presented the War Master with a cylinder containing a detailed map of every defense and infrastructure point in the Sol system. Every fortress, every weapons battery, every ship position, every vulnerability. It was an intelligence coup of staggering value, the product of years of Alpha Legion infiltration. And then Omegon drew a dagger, shattered it in his hand, and threw the pieces at Horus's feet before turning and walking away without another word. Abaddon, Horus's first captain, demanded that the War Master kill the insolent Primarch for his disrespect, but Horus let him go. Perhaps the War Master recognized something in that gesture, a statement of severance, a declaration that whatever debt the Alpha Legion owed, it was now paid. From this moment forward, the 20th Legion answered to no one but itself. The Alpha Legion withdrew from the traitor war effort. They refused to muster for the siege of Terra. Instead, they deployed to interdict Reboot Guilliman's advance, preventing the Ultramarines from reaching Terra in time to reinforce the Emperor's defenders. This is often cited as evidence that the Alpha Legion was still serving the traitor cause, but the manner in which they conducted this interdiction is significant. Rather than engaging Guilliman's forces in open battle, which would have resulted in catastrophic losses on both sides, the Alpha Legion employed a strategy of forced misdirection, appearing in overwhelming numbers to redirect loyalist vessels into dangerous warp translations, while studiously avoiding direct combat. It is worth considering what would have happened if the Alpha Legion had simply stood aside and allowed Guilliman to reach Terra. The Ultramarines were one of the largest and most powerful legions in the Imperium. Their arrival at the siege could have tipped the balance decisively in the Emperor's favor. Horus might have been defeated before he ever reached the Eternity Gate. The Emperor might not have been mortally wounded. The entire trajectory of the next 10,000 years of galactic history might have been different. But the Alpha Legion did not stand aside. They delayed Guilliman. And because of that delay, the siege of Terra played out the way it did. The Emperor was mortally wounded, Horus was slain, and the Imperium was condemned to the slow, a grinding decline that the Cabal had foreseen. Does this mean the Alpha Legion was serving the Cabal's vision after all? That despite severing ties with the alien organization, they were still pursuing the outcome that the Acuity had predicted? Or was there a more nuanced calculation at work, a third possibility that neither the Cabal nor the Emperor had considered? Consider this interpretation. If Omegon was a secret loyalist, he may have delayed Guilliman not to ensure Horus's victory, but to ensure that the siege lasted long enough for Horus to face the Emperor personally, because it was only in that personal confrontation, only in the moment where father faced corrupted son at the height of the War Master's power, that the Chaos God's hold on Horus could be broken. The Emperor's sacrifice, his willingness to destroy his favorite son to save humanity, was the act that shattered the Chaos God's concentration and allowed the loyalist forces to rally and win. Without that sacrifice, without that confrontation, Horus might have simply conquered Terra through conventional military means, and the Chaos God's influence would have remained intact. If this reading is correct, then the Alpha Legion's delay of Guilliman was not an act of treachery at all. It was an act of terrible, tragic necessity, a sacrifice of the immediate victory in order to achieve the deeper, more permanent victory that could only come from the Emperor and Horus meeting face to face. But this is, of course, speculation. But it is the kind of speculation that the Alpha Legion's ambiguous actions seem designed to provoke. Every event has multiple possible interpretations. Every action can be read as serving either the traitor or the loyalist cause, depending on the assumptions you bring to the analysis. And this permanent, irresolvable ambiguity is, itself, the Alpha Legion's most enduring legacy. It was a delaying action, not a destructive one. The Alpha Legion was keeping Guilliman away from Terra, yes, but they were doing so without actually destroying his forces. They were preserving the Ultramarines even as they delayed them. Why? If the Alpha Legion was truly committed to the traitor cause, why not crush Guilliman's fleet when they had the advantage of numbers and surprise? Unless the goal was not to help Horus win, but to ensure that both sides bled each other as much as possible. To weaken both the Emperor and the War Master, so that neither could emerge from the conflict strong enough to dominate what came after. This would be consistent with the Cabal's original vision, or at least with a modified version of it that preserved the possibility of a third outcome, one that neither the Cabal nor the Emperor had foreseen. This is speculation, of course. With the Alpha Legion, everything is speculation. But the pattern of Omegon's actions during the closing stages of the heresy, his withdrawal from the traitor muster, his refusal to participate in the siege of Terra, his delaying of Guilliman without destroying him, paints a picture of a Primarch who was neither loyalist nor traitor in the conventional sense. He was something else entirely, a free agent, playing a game so complex that even 10,000 years later, the galaxy has not been able to determine whose side he was really on. But the heresy ended with the Emperor's victory and Horus's death. The traitor legions, shattered and leaderless, retreated into the Eye of Terror, the vast warp rift at the heart of the galaxy. But the Alpha Legion did not follow them. While the other traitor forces fled to the safety of the warp, the Alpha Legion moved in the opposite direction, pushing toward the galactic east, deeper into Imperial space, following objectives of their own devising. As it was on a world called Escrador that the Alpha Legion story reached what the Imperial records consider its conclusion. The Alpha Legion encountered the Ultramarines and the Primarch leading the 20th, who the Imperium believed to be Alpharius, but who was almost certainly Omegon wearing his dead brother's name, chose to engage Guilliman's forces. The battle that followed was a disaster for the Alpha Legion. Omegon, expecting Guilliman to follow his usual codified approach to warfare, planned an elaborate series of traps and counterattacks designed to exploit the Ultramarines' predictability, but Guilliman surprised him. The Lord of Ultramar departed from his own doctrine, leading a rapid strike force directly at the Alpha Legion's command structure. It was unconventional, it was unexpected, and it caught the Alpha Legion completely off guard. The two Primarchs met in personal combat, and according to Imperial records, the Primarch of the Alpha Legion was killed. This should be the end of the story, the last of the twin Primarchs, cut down by the blade of Robute Guilliman. The Alpha Legion, decapitated and leaderless, left to scatter across the galaxy as a broken remnant of its former glory. But even after the death of their Primarch, the Alpha Legion did not break. Instead of crumbling, as Guilliman expected, the remaining Alpha Legionaries turned on the Ultramarine strike force with savage fury. They fought with such ferocity and such tactical brilliance that after a week of constant combat, the Ultramarines suffered near total casualties and were forced to evacuate the planet. A legion that had just lost its Primarch, its commander, its genetic father, fought better, harder, and more effectively than a legion led by one of the greatest strategic minds in human history. How is that possible? Unless the Alpha Legion did not actually lose its leadership. Unless the Primarch who fell on Escrador was not the true commander, but a decoy, a body double, a sacrifice designed to convince the enemy that the Hydra had been slain while its true head retreated into the shadows. The Alpha Legion was known to possess techniques for creating convincing body doubles. One method involved having a legionary consume a small quantity of their Primarch's blood, which would temporarily grant them the physical characteristics, combat abilities, and even the genetic markers of the Primarch himself. This process was potent enough to fool even an apothecary's genetic scans for a limited period. A legionary enhanced in this way could fight with the strength and skill of a Primarch for several hours before the effect wore off. If such a double were deployed against Guilliman, the initial stages of combat would have felt genuine. The enhanced legionary would have fought with Primarch-level ferocity, as in his genetic signature would have registered as authentic. By the time the effect began to fade, the battle might already have been decided. Guilliman, believing he had struck down a genuine Primarch, would have withdrawn in triumph, never suspecting that the real Omegon was somewhere else entirely, watching from the shadows as his plan unfolded exactly as intended. But this is only one possibility. There are others. It is also possible that Omegon chose to die at Escrador, that he decided, after the loss of his twin, after the failure of the Cabal's prophecy, after years of fighting a war that seemed to have no end and no purpose, that his time was done. That the galaxy no longer needed a hidden Primarch pulling strings from the darkness, and that the best thing he could do for his legion was to free it from its dependence on him, to die, and in dying, force the Alpha Legion to become what it was always meant to be, a hydra that did not need any single head to survive. This is the central mystery of Omegon's fate. Did he die on Escrador? Or did he send a proxy, an Alpha Legionary enhanced through the Legion's known practice of using blood rituals to temporarily grant ordinary Astartes the physical characteristics of their Primarch, to die in his place? The lore does not provide a definitive answer, and that ambiguity is entirely deliberate. What we can say with certainty is that the events at Escrador did not mark the end of the Alpha Legion's influence on the galaxy. Quite the opposite. In the 10,000 years since the heresy, the Alpha Legion has continued to operate with a level of sophistication and reach that would be remarkable for any military organization, let alone one that is supposed to be a broken remnant of a defeated rebellion. Consider the scope of their operations. The Alpha Legion maintains active cells on hundreds, possibly thousands, of Imperial worlds. Their agents are embedded within every level of Imperial society, from the lowest underhive gangs to the highest echelons of the administratum, and even, some suspect, the Inquisition itself. They recruit new members through a combination of gene seed implantation and the conversion of existing Imperial forces, a process that allows them to replenish their numbers in ways that other traitor legions, but dependent on the corrupted resources of the Eye of Terror, cannot match. They wage what amounts to a permanent shadow war against the Imperium, launching operations that range from targeted assassinations to planetary-scale insurrections. They foment heresy and rebellion on worlds that the Imperium considers secure. They infiltrate the command structures of Imperial Guard regiments and corrupt them from within. They manipulate chaos cults and use them as disposable assets in operations whose true objectives are known only to the Alpha Legion itself. And yet, alongside these seemingly traitor activities, there are persistent reports of Alpha Legion forces engaging in actions that serve no discernible chaos-aligned purpose. Warbands that attack other traitor forces. Operations that result in the destruction of chaos cults that the Alpha Legion itself supposedly created. Interventions that, if viewed from a certain angle, appear to benefit the Imperium rather than its enemies. The Alpha Legion's gene seed is another piece of the puzzle. Unlike the other traitor legions, whose gene seed has been corrupted to varying degrees by millennia of exposure to the warp, the Alpha Legion's genetic material remains remarkably pure. This is partly because the Legion has operated primarily in real space rather than within the Eye of Terror, but it also suggests a level of careful stewardship that would be difficult to maintain without centralized leadership. Someone, somewhere, is ensuring that the Alpha Legion's genetic heritage is preserved. Someone with the knowledge and the authority to enforce standards across a legion that is theoretically scattered across the galaxy in independent warbands. The question of whether Omegon survived Escrador is one of the most enduring debates in all of Warhammer 40,000 fandom. The evidence, as such as it is, can be read to support either conclusion. Those who believe Omegon died point to several compelling arguments. First, Guilliman was a Primarch himself. He would have been able to sense whether the being he was fighting was truly one of his brothers or merely a disguised Astartes. A normal space marine, even one enhanced by blood rituals, would not have been able to sustain the illusion for long against another Primarch's senses. Second, the Alpha Legion's behavior in the 10,000 years since the heresy seems more consistent with a force operating on autopilot, following pre-established plans without the guiding intelligence of a Primarch behind them, than with a force being directed by one of the Emperor's sons. Third, if Omegon had survived, why had he not made his presence felt in some decisive way during the intervening millennia? A living Primarch, even one as secretive as Omegon, should have been able to achieve something observable over the course of 10,000 years. But those who believe Omegon survived have their own arguments, and they are equally compelling. The Alpha Legion was unique among the traitor legions in that it never retreated to the Eye of Terror. It remained in real space, operating throughout Imperial territory, maintaining its strength, recruiting new members, and continuing to wage a shadow war against the Imperium. Unlike other traitor legions, and the Alpha Legion's gene seed has remained largely uncorrupted by chaos, suggesting a degree of organizational discipline and genetic integrity that would be difficult to maintain without central leadership. The Legion's continued effectiveness, its ability to execute complex operations across multiple sectors simultaneously, speaks to a level of coordination that seems beyond the capabilities of a leaderless collection of scattered warbands. Furthermore, the Alpha Legion's relationship with chaos has always been ambiguous in a way that distinguishes it from every other traitor legion. The Wordbearers worship the dark gods with fanatical devotion. The Emperor's children have been consumed by their addiction to excess. The Death Guard are slaves of plague and decay. But the Alpha Legion uses chaos when it suits them and discards it when it does not. Some warbands have fallen to corruption, true, but many others maintain a cold, functional relationship with the warp, employing its tools without being consumed by them. This is not the behavior of a legion that has given itself to the dark gods. This is the behavior of a legion that still answers to a higher authority, even if that authority remains invisible. Many Alpha Legionaries within the lore itself hold differing views. Some characters, like the Alpha Legionary known as Quetzal Karthak, believe it was specifically Omegon who was killed on Escrador. Others, like the operative known as Occam, believe their Primarch still lives. The Legion itself may not even know the truth, and that, perhaps more than anything else, is the most Alpha Legion thing of all. There is another layer to this mystery that deserves exploration. In the novel, Head of the Hydra, the narrative structure contains a twist regarding the identity of the narrator. Throughout the book, the reader assumes they are hearing the story from Alfarius' perspective. But the ending introduces the possibility that the roles have been switched, that the twin who was publicly known as Alfarius was actually Omegon, and vice versa. If this is true, and the novel's own opening warning, "I am Alfarius, this is a lie," suggests that nothing within should be taken at face value, then the implications are staggering. It would mean that the twin killed by Dawn at Pluto was actually Omegon, not Alfarius, and the surviving twin, but the one who assumed the fallen brother's identity and went on to face Guilliman at Escrador, was the real Alfarius all along. This reading would mean that Alfarius survived the heresy, not Omegon. And the Primarch, who might still be alive somewhere in the galaxy, hiding among his own legionaries, is the one who was raised by the Emperor himself, the one trained by Malcador, the one who was designed from the beginning to be the Imperium's hidden blade. It is a headache-inducing possibility. And it is entirely in character for the Alpha Legion to present their own history in a way that makes it impossible to determine which version of events is true. The confusion is not a bug. It is a feature. It is the Alpha Legion's greatest weapon, turned against the very audience trying to understand them. Let us linger on this point for a moment, because it speaks to something fundamental about how the Alpha Legion operates and why Omegon, or whichever twin survived, and is such a uniquely fascinating figure. In the realm of intelligence and covert operations, there is a concept called a wilderness of mirrors. It describes a state in which deception has become so pervasive so deeply layered, that even the people perpetrating the deception can no longer be certain what is true and what is false. The Alpha Legion exists in a permanent state of wilderness of mirrors. Their own legionaries frequently do not know the true objectives of the operations they are carrying out. Their officers may be operating under orders from a chain of command that traces back to a source they cannot identify. Their warbands may be unwittingly serving purposes that contradict their stated goals. This is by design. The Alpha Legion's cellular structure, in which individual units operate with a high degree of autonomy while remaining loosely connected to a larger network they cannot fully see, is one of the most sophisticated military organizational models in the entire setting. It is resistant to infiltration because no single member knows enough to compromise the whole. It is resistant to decapitation because the loss of any individual leader, even a Primarch, does not collapse the structure. And it is resistant to analysis, because the sheer volume of contradictory information generated by the Legion's various components makes it impossible for outside observers to determine the organization's true direction. If a Primarch designed this system, they designed it to survive their own death. They built an organization that would continue to function according to its core principles. Even if every member of its leadership was eliminated, the Hydra does not need its heads. The heads merely give it direction. Remove them, and the body continues to move, to fight, to survive. This raises an unsettling question. If the Alpha Legion was designed to function without a Primarch, then does it even matter whether Omegon survived? The Legion will continue regardless. Its operations will proceed according to pre-established patterns and protocols. Its agents will carry out their missions without knowing whether a Primarch is directing them, or whether they are simply following the echoes of plans laid down millennia ago. But there is a difference between a machine running on inertia and a machine with a hand on the controls. And the evidence, circumstantial as it is, suggests that someone is still steering the Alpha Legion. Someone with the vision, the patience, and the strategic brilliance to coordinate operations across the breadth of the galaxy without ever being detected. If that someone is Omegon, then he has achieved something that no other being in the history of the galaxy has managed. That he has hidden from the entire Imperium, from the forces of chaos, from the Aeldari and the Necrons and every other power in the galaxy for 10,000 years. He has maintained his anonymity while simultaneously directing one of the most active and effective military forces in existence. He has become, in the truest sense of the word, invisible. And in the grim darkness of the far future, invisibility is the ultimate power. Whatever the truth of Omegon's ultimate fate, the legacy of the hidden twin permeates every aspect of the Alpha Legion's existence in the 42nd Millennium. The 20th Legion continues to operate across the galaxy, its agents embedded within every level of Imperial society, its warbands striking from the shadows at targets that seem to follow no coherent strategic pattern. They attack loyalist forces, they attack traitor forces, they sabotage Imperial infrastructure and then, on other occasions, defend it. They sow chaos and disorder wherever they go, but whether that chaos serves the Dark Gods or some deeper, more inscrutable purpose remains an open question. The Inquisition has spent millennia trying to understand the Alpha Legion's motivations, and they have failed. Every informant who claims to have insight into the Legion's agenda is suspected of being an Alpha Legion double agent. Every document that purports to reveal their plans might be deliberate misinformation. Or even the most senior members of the Ordo Malleus, the branch of the Inquisition dedicated to combating the forces of chaos, admit that they cannot determine with any certainty whether the Alpha Legion is truly a servant of the Dark Gods or something else entirely. The most interesting thing about the Alpha Legion's behavior in the current era is its inconsistency. And here is the paradox. That inconsistency might itself be evidence of a guiding intelligence. If the Alpha Legion was simply a collection of independent warbands, each pursuing its own objectives, you would expect to see a random distribution of actions. Some attacking the Imperium, some attacking chaos, some doing both. But the pattern is more complex than that. There are moments of apparent coordination, operations that span multiple sectors, and involve warbands that are supposedly independent of one another, working toward objectives that only make sense when viewed from a perspective that encompasses the entire galaxy. This is what a Primarch's command looks like when filtered through the Alpha Legion's cellular structure. Not direct orders issued from a central command, not a visible leader standing at the head of an army, but a subtle, all-pervasive influence that nudges the Legion's disparate elements toward a common goal without any of them necessarily knowing what that goal is or who is directing them toward it. If Omegon lives, this is how he would operate. Not as a warlord leading armies, but as a ghost in the machine, a consciousness distributed across the galaxy, steering the Alpha Legion through a web of covert signals, dead drops, and pre-established protocols. Each warband would believe it was acting independently. In each operation would appear to be an isolated incident, but viewed from above, from the perspective of a being who thinks in centuries rather than years, the pattern would emerge. A pattern too complex for any ordinary mind to perceive, but perfectly clear to a Primarch who has spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of invisible command. There is also the matter of the stolen Primarch gene stock. During the heresy, the Alpha Legion recovered the original, while undifferentiated genetic template from which all the Primarchs were created. This material was never handed over to Horus or any other traitor force. The Alpha Legion kept it for themselves, and as far as anyone knows, they still have it. Think about what this means. The Alpha Legion possesses the raw genetic material to create new Primarchs, or at the very least, to create space marines of a quality that far exceeds anything the standard gene seed implantation process can produce. This is why the Alpha Legion has been able to maintain its numbers over 10,000 years of constant warfare, without access to the Forge Worlds and gene seed repositories that other legions rely upon. This is why their gene seed remains largely uncorrupted despite millennia of exposure to chaos. They have a genetic ace in the hole that no other force in the galaxy possesses. And who would be the guardian of such a treasure? Who would have the knowledge, the authority, and the strategic vision to decide how and when to use it? Only a Primarch, only Omegon. Furthermore, there are scattered references throughout the lore to a Chaos Lord claiming to be Alpharius, who has appeared at various points throughout the millennia, ravaging systems and then vanishing before any significant Imperial force can respond. The High Lords of Terror have received reports of this figure multiple times, each time dismissing the claims as the delusions of a madman or the propaganda of a renegade warlord trying to trade on a dead Primarch's reputation. But what if these sightings are real? What if Omegon, still wearing his brother's name, has been appearing throughout Imperial history at key moments, making his presence felt just enough to influence events before disappearing back into the shadows? It is a tantalizing possibility, and it is one that the lore has deliberately left open, here refusing to confirm or deny Omegon's survival in a way that keeps the mystery alive and the speculation flowing. The Alpha Legion still uses the phrase, "I am Alpharius," as both a greeting and a declaration of identity. Every legionary claims to be the Primarch. Every operative, every agent, every cultist in the Legion's vast network of mortal auxiliaries echoes the same words. It is a tactical device, certainly, designed to confuse enemies who are trying to identify the Legion's leadership. But it is also something more. It is a statement of philosophy, a declaration that the Alpha Legion is greater than any individual, even a Primarch, that the Hydra has no single head that can be cut off, that the whole is more important than the part. And yet, hidden within that collective identity, there is room for one individual to move unseen, one consciousness that could adopt the identity of any legionary, walk among them as an equal, give orders that would be obeyed without question, and then vanish back into the crowd as if they had never been there at all. Omegon was always the Primarch most suited to this kind of existence. He spent his entire life in the shadows. He never sought recognition or glory. He was content to let his brother stand in the spotlight while he worked in the darkness. If any Primarch could survive for 10,000 years without being detected, it would be him. And now consider the current state of the galaxy. The Great Rift has torn reality in two, splitting the Imperium along a screaming wound of warp energy that stretches from one end of the galaxy to the other. Reboot Gilliman has returned, resurrected from his near-death state on Macragge, and taken command of the Imperium's faltering defense. Other Primarchs are rumored to be stirring, awakening from their long absences to face the new age of darkness that has descended upon the galaxy. In this context, the return of a hidden Primarch, one whose existence is not known to the wider Imperium, one whose loyalties remain utterly ambiguous, takes on a significance that is difficult to overstate. If Omegon still lives, his return could change the balance of power in the galaxy in ways that no one can predict. Would he side with Gilliman and the Imperium? Would he continue his shadow war against both loyalist and traitor forces? Would he reveal himself at all, or would he continue to operate from the shadows, manipulating events from behind a veil of deception that has held for 10 millennia? The beauty of Omegon as a character, the reason he continues to fascinate fans and inspire debate after decades of lore, is that there is no answer. There is only the question. And the question itself, the uncertainty, the ambiguity, the maddening inability to pin down the truth, is the most Alpha Legion thing imaginable. Omegon represents something unique among the Primarchs. He is not a tragic hero like Sanguinius, whose death inspires mourning and veneration. He is not a fallen champion like Horus, whose corruption serves as a cautionary tale about the seductive power of chaos. He is not a stalwart defender like Rogel Dawn, whose unwavering resolve defines the concept of duty. Omegon is the unknown. He is the question mark at the end of every certainty. He is the nagging suspicion that things are not as they appear, that the war between loyalist and traitor is not as simple as the propaganda makes it seem, that somewhere in the shadows, someone is playing a game that no one else even knows is being played. In the lore of Warhammer 40,000, where the universe is defined by the endless grinding conflict between chaos and order, between damnation and duty, Omegon occupies a space that is neither one nor the other. He is the Primarch who chose to exist between the lines, to reject the binary thinking that trapped his brothers into their respective fates. He saw the galaxy not as a battlefield with two sides, but as a puzzle with infinite variables. And he spent his existence trying to solve that puzzle in a way that no one else could even conceptualize. Whether he succeeded or failed, whether he lives or died, whether his plans bore fruit or crumbled to dust, the mere fact that he tried, as that he dared to look beyond the narrow horizons of loyalty and treachery and imagine a third way forward, makes him one of the most compelling figures in the entire setting. The Hydra is a creature of myth, a serpent with many heads that cannot be killed by cutting off any single one. For every head that falls, 2 more grow in its place. The Alpha Legion chose this symbol deliberately, and it is impossible to discuss Omegon without acknowledging the metaphor that it represents. Alpharius fell at Pluto. Perhaps Omegon fell at Escrador, but the Hydra lives on. The Alpha Legion persists, and somewhere in the vast dark galaxy, the question of Omegon's fate remains unanswered. A mystery that refuses to be solved, a secret that refuses to be told. And in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war and the laughter of thirsting gods, perhaps that mystery is exactly what the galaxy needs. A reminder that not everything can be known, that not every enemy can be identified, that not every ally wears their loyalty on their sleeve. Because in the end, Omegon was never just a Primarch, he was an idea. The idea that the truth is not a single thing, but a hydra with many heads, and that the greatest weapon in the universe is not a bolter, or a chainsword, or even a Xenos spear that can cut through reality itself. The greatest weapon is the thing your enemy does not know. And Omegon mastered that weapon better than anyone who has ever lived. What makes Omegon's story so resonant is not just the mystery that surrounds him, it is the tragedy. Here is a being who was created for a specific purpose, to be a general, a leader, a conqueror, and who instead was forced by circumstance into a role that required him to be invisible. He could never stand in the light. He could never take credit for his victories or be recognized for his sacrifices. But he could never have the kind of relationship with his legion that other Primarchs enjoyed. The adulation, the respect, the sense of family and belonging that comes from being acknowledged as a father figure by thousands of warriors who carry your genetic legacy. Omegon's greatest achievement was making himself invisible, and his greatest curse was the same thing. There is a moment in the lore, during the aftermath of the Battle of Pluto, that captures this tragedy perfectly. When Alpharius dies, Dawn orders the knowledge of his death to be suppressed. The Praetorian of Terror refuses to acknowledge that Alpharius was even present in the Sol system, denying his brother Primarch the recognition of having fallen in battle. It is a final insult, a last act of contempt from a Primarch who never respected the Alpha Legion's methods. But for Omegon, this suppression of truth carried an additional weight. His twin, his other half, the being who had shared his soul, had been killed and then erased from history. There would be no monument, no eulogy, no acknowledgement that a son of the Emperor had fallen in defense of, or in opposition to, the Imperium. Alpharius died in obscurity, and Omegon was the only being in the galaxy who truly mourned him. And then, Omegon picked up his brother's name and kept fighting, not for glory, not for revenge, not even, perhaps, for the Emperor or the Imperium. But because that is what you do when you are the last head of the Hydra. You keep going, you endure. You carry the weight of all the secrets and all the lies and all the impossible choices on your shoulders. And you keep moving forward into the darkness, because the alternative is to stop. And to stop is to admit that everything you have done and everything you have sacrificed was for nothing. That is the story of Omegon, the Primarch who carried the heaviest burden of all the Emperor's sons, and who did so in absolute silence, without recognition, without thanks, without even the comfort of knowing that someone, somewhere, understood what he was doing and why. In the grim darkness of the far future, that kind of selfless, invisible sacrifice might be the most heroic thing of all. I am Alpharius. This is a lie. Or is it? If you enjoyed this deep dive into the most mysterious Primarch in Warhammer 40,000, then make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Q on 40,000 for more stories from the grim darkness of the far future. We have so many more tales to tell, so many more mysteries to explore, and your support makes it all possible. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new video, and drop a comment below telling me what you think. Is Omegon still alive? Is he a loyalist? A traitor? Something else entirely? I want to hear your theories. Until next time, sleep well. And remember, in the galaxy of the 42nd millennium, nothing is ever what it seems. Hydra Dominatus.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.